The night before my 68th birthday, my late husband came to me in a dream and warned, "Don't wear the brooch your daughter-in-law gave you." I woke up with my heart racing. It was terrifying. Estella had just gifted me a vintage pin, but when the jeweler pried it open, he immediately called the police. Welcome to her Kindle. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and gave my video a like. Now, let's jump into the story. I'm sure you'll enjoy it till the end. Maria Thomas gasped for air, her body jerking upright in the darkness of her bedroom. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, the sound of her own pulse loud in her ears. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:14 a.m. Outside, the familiar sounds of a Charleston summer night, the hum of cicadas and the distant rustle of the magnolia trees, usually brought her comfort. Tonight, however, the silence of the house felt heavy, almost suffocating. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing, but the image from her sleep was burned into her mind. She had just seen George. It wasn't the first time she had dreamt of her late husband since he passed 3 years ago. Usually, those dreams were hazy and soft, filled with the memory of Sunday breakfasts or walks along the Battery. In those dreams, he was always smiling, that gentle, easy grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. But this was different. This had been sharp, vivid, and terrifyingly real. In the dream, George had stood at the foot of their bed, wearing his favorite navy suit, the one he wore to church on Easter. But he wasn't smiling. His face was etched with a worry Maria had rarely seen in their 40 years of marriage. He had looked right at her, his eyes intense and urgent. He didn't say hello. He didn't tell her he loved her. He simply leaned forward, his voice clear as a bell, and said, "Don't wear the brooch your daughter-in-law, Estella, gave you." Maria swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet finding the cool hardwood floor. She shivered, despite the warm, humid air clinging to the room. The message replayed in her head on a loop. "Don't wear the brooch." She reached out and turned on the small lamp by the bed. The soft yellow light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows, but it didn't chase away the cold pit of dread in her stomach. On the dresser across the room sat a small, velvet jewelry box. It looked innocent enough. It was a deep, royal blue, the kind of box that promised something special inside. Estella, her son Nathaniel's wife, had given it to her just last week. Maria stood up, her knees feeling a little weak, and walked over to the dresser. She stared at the box for a long moment before reaching out to open it. Inside lay the brooch. It really was a beautiful piece. It was an antique, shaped like a wreath of silver leaves with small, sparkling stones that caught the lamplight. When Estella had handed it to her, she had made such a production out of it. "It's a peace offering, Maria," Estella had said, her voice high and sweet. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I saw this in an estate sale and thought of you immediately. It's elegant, classic, just like you." Maria remembered feeling touched at the time. Her relationship with Estella had been rocky for years. Estella could be sharp, sometimes dismissive, and Maria often felt like an intruder in her own son's life. So, this gesture had felt like a turning point. Nathaniel had been beaming, so happy to see the two women in his life getting along. He had insisted she wear it to her birthday dinner tomorrow night. It would mean the world to Estella, Mom. Nathaniel had said, squeezing her shoulder, "Please wear it." Maria looked down at the silver leaves. It was exactly the kind of jewelry George would have admired. He loved vintage things. He loved the history behind them. So why would his spirit come to her in the dead of night and tell her to stay away from it? She ran a finger over the velvet of the box, careful not to touch the metal itself. A strange superstition took hold of her. Was she losing her mind? It was just a dream. That's what people would say. They would tell her she was just an older woman missing her husband, letting her anxieties manifest in her sleep. Maybe she was just nervous about the birthday dinner. Maybe she was subconsciously looking for a reason to dislike Estella's gift because she still didn't fully trust her daughter-in-law. But the feeling in her gut said otherwise. It was a nagging, heavy sensation that she couldn't shake. Throughout her life, Maria had learned that intuition was a quiet thing, but it was rarely wrong. She remembered the time she had a bad feeling about a road trip and stayed home, only to find out later there had been a terrible storm on that exact route. She remembered the feeling she got when Nathaniel was sick as a child before the doctors even knew what was wrong. This felt like that. But worse. Could it be a sign? She whispered to the empty room. She picked up the framed photo of George that sat next to the jewelry box. He looked so happy in the picture, taken at their 35th anniversary. She traced the line of his jaw with her thumb. "What are you trying to tell me, George?" she asked. "Is she trying to hurt me? Or is the brooch just bad luck?" The silence of the house offered no answers. Maria closed the jewelry box with a snap. The sound was loud in the quiet room. She felt foolish for being afraid of a piece of jewelry. It was just metal and stone. It was a gift. To refuse to wear it would be an insult to Estella, and, more importantly, it would hurt Nathaniel. He wanted peace in the family so badly. If she showed up to dinner tomorrow without it, after promising she would wear it, the tension would return instantly. Estella would make a face. Nathaniel would look disappointed. And Maria would look like the ungrateful mother-in-law. She tried to convince herself it was nonsense. She told herself she had eaten something spicy before bed, or that the stress of turning 68 was getting to her head. She walked back to the bed and sat down, pulling the quilt up to her chin. But as she lay back down, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her, the message remained clear. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a riddle. It was a command. Don't wear the brooch. Maria turned on her side, facing the window. The first hint of dawn was starting to turn the sky a deep, bruised purple. Her birthday was beginning. Today she was supposed to celebrate. Today she was supposed to go to dinner with her son and his wife and wear the beautiful antique pin. But as the morning light began to creep into the room, Maria made a silent promise to the empty air. She didn't know why, and she didn't know how she would explain it to Nathaniel, but she knew one thing for certain. She trusted George more than she trusted anyone living. The fear hadn't left her. If anything, it was growing, transforming from a shock into a cold, hard resolve. There was something wrong with that gift. She didn't know what it was yet, but she wasn't going to let it near her heart. The dream felt too real to ignore. And if George was worried enough to cross the divide between the living and the dead to warn her, she had better listen. Maria stood before the vanity mirror in her hallway, smoothing down the front of her cream-colored blouse. She had chosen this outfit carefully. It was simple, elegant, and sturdy armor for the evening ahead. On the small table beside her purse sat the blue velvet box. The lid was closed, but Maria could feel the object inside radiating a cold energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. She had spent the entire day bargaining with herself. First, she decided she would leave it at home. Then, she thought she might bring it in her purse just to show she had it. But every time she reached for the box, George's voice from the dream echoed in her mind, sharp and commanding. "Don't wear it." The doorbell rang, cutting through the silence. Maria jumped, her nerves already frayed. She took a deep breath, plastered a smile on her face, and went to open the door. It was Nathaniel. Her son looked handsome in a light gray button-down shirt, his face flushed with the heat of the late afternoon. He held a bouquet of lilies, her favorite. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. He smelled like the cedar soap he had used since he was a teenager, a scent that usually calmed her down instantly. But today, even his hug felt tense. He pulled back and looked her up and down, his smile faltering just a fraction. "You look beautiful, Mom, but you aren't wearing it." Maria's stomach dropped. She had hoped he wouldn't notice immediately, or that she could steer the conversation elsewhere. "Oh, the brooch," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "I was just thinking it might be a bit heavy for this blouse. Nat. I didn't want to tear the silk." Nathaniel's face fell. It wasn't anger she saw there, but a deep, childish disappointment that twisted her heart. "Mom, please," he said softly. "Estella is really nervous about tonight. She thinks you hate the gift. If you show up without it, she's going to think you're rejecting her peace offering. It's just for a few hours." For me, that was the weapon that always worked. For me, Maria looked at her son, at the worry lines forming around his eyes. She realized in that moment that he was tired. He was tired of the friction between his wife and his mother. He just wanted one night of peace. Maria sighed, a sound of defeat. She couldn't tell him a ghost told her not to wear it. He would look at her with that pitying expression people reserve for the elderly who are losing their grip. She walked back to the hallway table and opened the box. The brooch gleamed under the hallway light. It was an antique, supposedly passed down through Estella's family, though Maria had never seen anyone in that family wear it. It was a silver wreath, heavy and intricate. "Here," Nathaniel said, stepping forward eagerly. "Let me help you." He took the brooch from the box. As he fumbled with the clasp, Maria felt a sudden chill, as if a window had been left open in winter. Nathaniel pinned it to her left lapel, right over her heart. "Ouch," she flinched. "Sorry, the pin is a little dull," Nathaniel muttered, securing it. "There. Perfect." He stepped back to admire it. "See? It looks stunning on you." Maria looked in the mirror. The brooch did look beautiful, objectively speaking. But on her chest, it felt like a lead weight. It felt cold, the metal seeming to seep a chill right through her blouse and into her skin. She touched it tentatively, and for a split second, she thought she felt a vibration, a low hum of danger. "Let's go," she said quickly, grabbing her purse. She needed to get this over with. The drive to the restaurant was filled with Nathaniel's chatter about work and the kids, but Maria barely heard him. She kept touching the brooch, checking the clasp, fighting the urge to rip it off and throw it out the window. When they arrived at the restaurant, a nice seafood place on the waterfront, Estella was already seated at a corner table. She stood up as they approached. She was wearing a sharp red dress, her dark hair pulled back tightly. Estella's eyes went immediately to Maria's chest. Maria watched her daughter-in-law closely. She expected a smile of triumph, or perhaps a genuine look of happiness that the gift was accepted. Instead, Maria saw something else. Estella's shoulders dropped about an inch. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. It was relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. "You wore it," Estella said, her voice slightly breathless. She came around the table and gave Maria a quick, stiff hug. It looks very expensive on you, Maria. Happy birthday." "Thank you, Estella," Maria said, sitting down carefully. "It's a unique piece. Nathaniel tells me it's a family heirloom." "Yes," Estella said, sitting back down and reaching for her wine glass. She took a large gulp, more than was polite for a toast. "From my grandmother's side. Very old." As the dinner progressed, the uneasiness in Maria's gut grew from a whisper to a scream. The brooch felt heavier by the minute. It wasn't just the physical weight. It was the psychological burden of George's warning. "Don't wear it." And here she was defying him. She tried to focus on the conversation, but her eyes kept drifting to Estella. Over the last few months, Maria had noticed changes in her daughter-in-law. They were subtle things, the kind of things only another woman or a mother would notice. Estella had become jumpy. When Maria would drop by the house unannounced to see the grandkids, Estella would often be on the phone, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. As soon as she heard Maria's car door slam, she would hang up and shove the phone in her pocket, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then there was the way Estella looked at her. In the past, Estella's gaze had been indifferent or annoyed. Recently, it had become calculating. Maria would catch Estella staring at her from across the room at Sunday dinners, studying her like a math problem she was trying to solve. Tonight was no different. Estella wasn't eating much. She was shredding her napkin under the table, her eyes darting around the restaurant. Every time a waiter passed by or a door opened, Estella flinched. She kept glancing at the brooch on Maria's chest, then quickly looking away, as if the sight of it made her nervous. "Is everything okay with the food, Mom?" Nathaniel asked, noticing Maria had barely touched her shrimp and grits. "It's delicious," Maria lied. "I'm just not very hungry." She felt a wave of nausea. Was it the stress? Or was it the brooch? She felt a strange heat radiating from the spot where the pin pierced the fabric. It was probably her imagination running wild after the dream, but she felt like the metal was burning her. "Estella," Maria said suddenly, interrupting Nathaniel's story about his golf game. Estella's head snapped up. "Yes. You mentioned this was your grandmother's," Maria said, keeping her voice steady. "I don't recall seeing it in any of the old photos you showed me of her." Estella blinked rapidly. "Oh, well, she didn't wear it often. It was kept away for special occasions." "Why?" Maria pressed. Estella laughed, a high-pitched, brittle sound. "I don't know, Maria. Old people have their quirks, right? Maybe she just wanted to keep it safe. Like I wanted you to have it." She reached out and touched Nathaniel's hand. "I just wanted to do something nice for your mother, Nat. That's all." Nathaniel smiled at his wife, completely oblivious to the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "And we appreciate it, honey. Don't we, Mom?" "Yes," Maria said. "We certainly do." Maria excused herself to go to the restroom. As soon as she was out of their sight, her composure cracked. She rushed into the bathroom, thankfully empty, and leaned against the sink, staring at her reflection. She looked pale. The brooch seemed to glare at her from the mirror, a silver eye mocking her. She gripped the edges of the sink. She needed to take it off. Right now. But if she went back to the table without it, the questions would start. Nathaniel would be hurt. Estella would play the victim. She looked closer at the brooch in the harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom. There was something odd about the center stone. It sat a little high in the setting, as if it wasn't quite flush with the metal. And the clasp, when Nathaniel had pinned it on, it had felt stiff, but now she noticed a tiny, almost invisible hinge on the side of the main body. It didn't look like a decorative hinge. It looked functional. A shiver of pure fear went down her spine. Passed down through the family. Kept away. Don't wear it. George wasn't talking about fashion. He was talking about survival. Maria took a deep breath. She wouldn't take it off yet. She couldn't cause a scene here. But she made a decision. Tomorrow morning, first thing, she wasn't going to put this back in her jewelry box. She wasn't going to give it to charity. She was going to take it to Henry, the jeweler on King Street, who had repaired George's watch years ago. He knew antiques. He would tell her if this was just an ugly piece of jewelry or if her mind and her dead husband were trying to tell her something far more sinister. She straightened her blouse, avoided looking at the brooch in the mirror, and walked back out to the dining room. She would play the part of the grateful mother-in-law for one more hour. But the trust, fragile as it was gone. The game had changed, and Maria was just beginning to realize she was a player in it. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting striped shadows across the breakfast table, but the brightness did nothing to lift the heaviness in Maria's chest. The brooch sat on the counter, back in its blue velvet box. She hadn't slept well after the dinner. Even though the night had ended without incident, the feeling of the metal against her chest had lingered long after she took it off. It was a phantom weight, a cold spot over her heart that a hot shower couldn't wash away. She needed to talk to someone. Not Nathaniel. He was too involved. She needed someone who knew her, someone who knew George. Maria poured her coffee into a travel mug and walked out the back door, crossing the dewy grass to the hedge that separated her yard from her neighbor's. Mary was already out, kneeling in her flower bed, pulling weeds with the aggressive determination of a woman who had seen it all. Mary was 70, 2 years older than Maria, and had been her neighbor for 30 years. She had been there when Nathaniel scraped his knees, when George got sick, and when the funeral home car pulled into the driveway. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink," Mary said without looking up, snapping a dandelion stem. "I didn't," Maria admitted, sitting down on the wrought iron bench near the hydrangeas. "I need to ask you something crazy, Mary." Mary finally looked up, wiping her dirt-stained hands on her apron. She saw the look on Maria's face, the dark circles, the tight line of her mouth, and abandoned her gardening tools. She came over and sat next to Maria, her presence solid and grounding. "It's about George," Maria started, her voice trembling slightly. She told Mary everything. She described the dream in vivid detail. The navy suit, the urgency in his eyes, the specific warning about the brooch. She told her about the dinner, the strange stiffness of the clasp, and the way Estella had looked so relieved when she saw Maria wearing it. Mary listened intently, nodding slowly. She didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She just stared at the hydrangeas, processing. "You know," Mary said softly, "George was a practical man. He wasn't given to flights of fancy. If he's showing up in your dreams, looking worried, well, I wouldn't dismiss it outright. So you think I'm in danger?" Maria asked, her breath hitching. "I think," Mary said, choosing her words carefully, "that sometimes our loved ones try to reach out, especially when they know we're at a crossroads. Maybe he senses you're unhappy with how things are with Estella. Maybe the brooch represents that tension. Or maybe—" Mary trailed off, then patted Maria's knee. "Maybe you're just grieving. Honey, grief has a way of making us see shadows where there aren't any. It hasn't been that long, really." Maria wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe this was just her mind playing tricks on her, manifesting her dislike for her daughter-in-law into a ghost story. "Don't overthink it," Mary advised, standing up to head back to her weeds. "But if it makes you feel better, don't wear the thing. Put it in a drawer. You don't owe Estella your peace of mind." Maria walked back to her house, feeling only half comforted. Mary's logic was sound, but it didn't explain the physical sensation Maria had felt. It didn't explain the cold. Back in her kitchen, Maria stared at the blue box. The doubt was eating at her. Was she being unfair? Estella had tried. She had bought a family heirloom. Maybe Maria was the problem. Maybe she was the bitter mother-in-law everyone joked about, looking for reasons to hate the younger woman who had stolen her son. She was just about to put the box away in a drawer when the phone rang. The screen flashed Nathaniel. Maria took a deep breath, forcing a cheerful tone into her voice. "Good morning, Nat." "Morning, Mom." Nathaniel's voice was booming, full of energy. "I just wanted to call and say thank you again for last night. I know you weren't feeling 100%, but it meant a lot to me that you came. It was a lovely dinner," Maria lied. "The seafood was excellent. And Estella was over the moon," Nathaniel continued, barreling past her comment. "She wouldn't stop talking about how good the brooch looked on you. She was worried it might be too old-fashioned. but she said you carried it off perfectly. In fact, she was hoping you'd wear it again this Sunday for the church picnic. She wants to get a picture of you two together with it. Maria felt her stomach clench. The church picnic, hundreds of people, heat, and that heavy, cold metal pin to her chest for hours. Oh, Nathaniel, I don't know, Maria said, her grip on the phone tightening. It's a bit heavy for a daytime picnic, don't you think? I was worried about the clasp, actually. It felt a little loose. There was a pause on the line. The warmth in Nathaniel's voice cooled instantly. Mom, come on, he sighed. Don't start picking it apart. It's a vintage piece. It's supposed to be delicate. I just have a bad feeling about it, Nat, Maria blurted out. She hadn't meant to say it, but the words tumbled out. After the dream I told you about, and just the way it sits, I really think I should get it looked at before I wear it again. Nathaniel laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was a sharp, dismissive bark. The dream? Mom, we talked about this. That's just old lady superstition. You're letting a nightmare ruin a nice gesture. Estella is trying so hard. Can't you just meet her halfway? Old lady superstition. The words stung more than Maria expected. They reduced her legitimate fear, her intuition, and her connection to his father down to a senile quirk. He didn't see her as his mother, the woman who raised him and protected him. He saw her as a problem to be managed, an obstacle to his happy marriage. I'm not trying to be difficult, Maria said, her voice quiet and firm. I'm telling you something feels wrong. Look, just think about it, okay? Nathaniel said, his tone clipped. I have to go to work. Love you, Mom. The line went dead before she could say it back. Maria lowered the phone slowly. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Nathaniel's dismissal had done something Mary's advice couldn't. It had clarified things. He wasn't going to listen. If she was right, if there was something actually wrong with that brooch, Nathaniel would never believe it until he saw proof. He was too blinded by his desire for a happy family to see the cracks in the foundation. She looked at the blue velvet box again. The doubt was gone, replaced by a cold, hard determination. It wasn't grief. It wasn't a crossroads. It was a warning. She wasn't going to wear it to the picnic. She wasn't going to wear it ever again. Maria grabbed her purse and the car keys. She snatched the blue box off the counter and shoved it deep into her bag. She didn't care if Nathaniel called it superstition. She didn't care if Mary thought she was overthinking. She was going to find out the truth. She was going to see Henry, the jeweler, and she prayed, with every fiber of her being, that she was wrong. Because if she was right, it meant that the danger wasn't just in the metal. It meant the danger was sleeping in her son's bed. The drive to downtown Charleston usually calmed Maria's nerves. She loved the cobblestone streets, the window boxes spilling over with bright geraniums, and the salty tang of the harbor air. But today, the historic beauty of the city was just a blur passing by her car window. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. The blue velvet box in her purse on the passenger seat felt like it was ticking, a bomb waiting to go off. She found a parking spot on King Street, a few blocks down from the shop she was looking for. Henry's fine jewelry and antiques had been a staple in Charleston for 40 years. Henry was a contemporary of George's, a man who treated jewelry not just as adornment, but as history. If anyone could tell her the truth about this brooch, it was him. Maria locked her car and walked briskly down the sidewalk, clutching her purse against her side. The afternoon heat was oppressive, the humidity clinging to her skin, but Maria felt cold. She kept replaying Nathaniel's voice in her head. Old lady superstition. She felt a pang of guilt. Was she wasting everyone's time? Was she about to walk into a professional establishment and ask a man to inspect a piece of jewelry just because a ghost told her to? She almost turned back. She paused in front of a bakery window, looking at her reflection. She looked tired. Maybe Nathaniel was right. Maybe she was just a lonely woman looking for drama where there was none. But then she remembered the chill in the bathroom at the restaurant. She remembered the way the clasp had felt stiff, almost mechanical. She pushed the door to the jewelry shop open, the little brass bell above it chiming a cheerful hello. The shop was cool and smelled of lemon polish and old wood. It was quiet, a relief from the noise of the street outside. Henry was behind the counter, adjusting a watch with a tiny screwdriver. He looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile when he recognized her. "Maria Thomas," he said, setting his tools down. "I haven't seen you since, well, it's been a while. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing all right, Henry," Maria said, walking to the counter. She tried to return his smile, but she knew it didn't reach her eyes. "I need a favor, a professional opinion." Henry adjusted his spectacles, sensing the shift in her tone. "Of course. Did you break something, or are you looking to sell?" "Neither, really," Maria said. She reached into her bag and pulled out the box. Her hand trembled slightly as she set it on the glass countertop. "My daughter-in-law gave this to me for my birthday. She said it's a family heirloom passed down through her side, but something feels off about it. The clasp is sticky, and honestly, Henry, I just have a bad feeling. I wanted you to look at it before I wear it again." Henry nodded, his expression serious. He respected intuition. In the antique business, gut feelings often saved you from buying fakes. "Let's have a look," he said gently. He opened the box. For a moment, he just admired it. "Well, it's certainly a striking piece," he murmured. "Mid-Victorian style, silver wreath design. Very popular in the 1860s. He picked it up, holding it up to the light. He turned it over, examining the back. Maria held her breath. She watched his face, waiting for him to tell her it was a cheap reproduction or that the pin was just bent. But Henry didn't speak. His brow furrowed. He tilted the brooch, squinting at the underside of the silver leaves. The silence in the shop stretched thin, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "What is it?" Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Henry didn't answer immediately. He reached under the counter and pulled out a jeweler's loupe, a small magnifying glass. He fitted to his eye and leaned in close, inspecting the area near the clasp. He turned the brooch slowly, testing the weight of it in his palm. Then he stopped. He went completely still. Slowly, Henry lowered the brooch back onto the velvet pad on the counter. He took the loupe out of his eye and looked at Maria. The warmth was gone from his face, replaced by a look of grave concern. "Maria," he said, his voice low, "I need you to be honest with me. Where exactly did this come from?" "Estella gave it to me," Maria repeated, panic rising in her throat. "She said it was her grandmother's." "Henry, what's wrong? Is it fake?" "No," Henry said, shaking his head slowly. "It's not fake, but it's not what it seems either. You said you have a bad feeling about this. You should trust that. You should definitely not wear it. There is something very wrong here." Maria's heart skipped a beat. "Wrong how?" "It's too heavy," Henry explained, pointing to the center of the wreath. "The silver work is hollow in most pieces from this era to keep them light on the fabric. This one is solid, but the weight distribution is off. It's back heavy." He picked up a small, thin metal tool from his workbench. "And I found a seam." Maria watched, paralyzed, as Henry used the tool to gently probe a microscopic line along the back of the brooch, right behind the central stone setting. It wasn't a decorative line. It was a break in the metal. "Watch," Henry whispered. He applied a tiny amount of pressure to the pin mechanism itself, not unbuckling it, but pushing it upwards in a specific way, the way the tension would sit if someone were struggling to unclasp it from thick fabric. Click! A tiny, hidden compartment on the back of the brooch popped open. It was so small, no larger than a fingernail, expertly hidden beneath the silver leaves. Maria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Inside the dark hollow of the silver compartment lay a small, translucent pouch. It was flattened, designed to fit perfectly into the space. Inside the pouch was a fine, pale powder. My God, Maria breathed. What is that? Henry didn't touch the pouch. He pulled his hand back, as if the brooch had burned him. He looked at the mechanism again, his face pale. This isn't just decoration, ma'am, Henry said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. I've read about these. They're sometimes called mourning traps or vengeance pieces, though they are incredibly rare. The mechanism is designed to trigger when the pin is manipulated with force, like when you're taking it off. He looked up at her, his eyes wide. If you had worn this, if you had struggled to get it off your dress and pushed that pin too hard, this pouch is designed to rupture. The powder would have dusted right into your face, right as you were looking down at it. Maria felt the room spin. She gripped the counter for support. The image of herself standing in front of her mirror, struggling with the pin, inhaling that dust, it was so clear. If the clasp hadn't been stiff yesterday, if she hadn't felt that cold dread, she would have worn it. She would have taken it off. Is it drugs? Maria asked, her mind racing to find a logical explanation. Maybe Estella was a drug addict. Maybe she was using the brooch to smuggle something. Henry shook his head grimly. I don't think so. The quantity is too small for recreation, but plenty for other things. And the way it's hidden, this is meant to be a weapon, Maria. I believe it's some kind of toxic substance. He stepped back from the counter, putting distance between himself and the object. I can't let you take this out of the shop, Maria, and I can't just hand it back to you. This is dangerous. Maria looked at the powder. It looked so harmless, like baking soda or talc, but looking at it, she felt a wave of nausea, so strong she thought she might faint. George's dream hadn't just been a warning about bad luck. He had been screaming at her from the grave because he saw the weapon pointed at her heart. What do we do? Maria asked, her voice trembling. Do I take it to a lab? Henry reached for the phone on the wall behind him. He looked at her with a sad, apologetic expression. No, Maria, he said firmly, I'm afraid I have to call the authorities. This isn't a family dispute anymore. If that powder is what I think it is, this is attempted murder. Maria stood frozen in the middle of the charming, lemon-scented shop, listening to Henry dial 3 numbers. The reality of her life had just shattered into a million pieces. Her daughter-in-law hadn't just given her a bad gift. She hadn't just been rude. She had handed Maria a loaded gun wrapped in velvet. And Nathaniel, her poor, blind Nathaniel, he had pinned it to her chest with his own hands. The silence that followed Henry's phone call was heavier than anything Maria had ever felt. She stood by the glass counter, her hands gripping the strap of her purse so tightly that her fingers went numb. Henry had moved the blue velvet box to the far side of the counter, treating it like a radioactive object. He wouldn't look at her directly, preferring to watch the front door, waiting for the police to arrive. Maria felt a rush of panic that made her knees weak. She wanted to run. She wanted to grab the brooch, throw it in the river, and pretend none of this was happening. Calling the police made it real. It turned a family problem into a crime scene. It turned her daughter-in-law into a suspect. Henry, Maria whispered, her voice cracking. Are you sure? Maybe it's just old perfume powder or something for preservation. Henry looked at her sadly. Maria, I've been in this business for 50 years. I know the difference between a sachet of lavender and a hidden compartment designed to snap open under pressure. We have to wait for them. 10 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a plain suit stepped out. He didn't look like the police officers Maria saw on television. He looked tired and serious. He walked in, the bell chiming cheerfully above him. A stark contrast to the mood in the room. "I'm Detective Johnson," he said, flashing a badge. He looked from Henry to Maria. "You called about a suspicious item?" Henry nodded and gestured to the far end of the counter. "It's over there. I haven't touched it since I found the mechanism." Maria watched, paralyzed, as Detective Johnson put on a pair of blue latex gloves. He approached the brooch with a clinical detachment that chilled her. Henry explained what he had found. The hidden hinge, the tension in the pin, and the pouch of powder nestled inside the hollow silver. The detective leaned in, examining the powder without opening the pouch. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and shone it into the crevice of the metal. After a long moment, he straightened up and looked at Maria. His eyes were kind but hard. "Ma'am," he said, "who gave you this?" Maria opened her mouth, but the name stuck in her throat. Saying it out loud to a police officer felt like a betrayal. It felt final. "My daughter-in-law," Maria managed to whisper. "Estella. She gave it to me for my birthday yesterday." Detective Johnson took out a small notepad and a pen. "And did she tell you where she got it?" "She said it was a family heirloom," Maria said, "from her grandmother." The detective wrote that down. The scratching of his pen on the paper sounded incredibly loud in the quiet shop. "And has she been asking you about money lately? Has there been any tension in the family?" Maria felt sick. The questions were hitting too close to home. "There's always been tension," she admitted, "but not like this. Not murder." "I didn't say murder, ma'am," Johnson said calmly. "But this device is consistent with historical pieces used for aggressive purposes. We need to test that powder." He turned back to the brooch. He produced a clear plastic evidence bag and carefully, using a pair of tweezers Henry provided, lifted the brooch into the bag. He sealed it with a sharp zip. "I'm going to take this into evidence," Johnson said. "We'll run tests on the substance. If it's harmless, you'll get your jewelry back. If it's not..." He let the sentence hang in the air. Maria stared at the bag. Her birthday gift. A peace offering. Now, it was evidence number one. "Detective," Maria asked, her voice trembling. "My son, he pinned it on me. He wanted me to wear it so badly. Do you think..." She couldn't finish the question. Did Nathaniel know? Johnson looked at her sharply. "Your son pinned it on you?" "Yes," Maria said, tears stinging her eyes. "He was so insistent. He said it would mean the world to Estella." Johnson made another note. "We'll need to speak to both of them. But for now, Mrs. Thomas, I need you to listen to me very carefully." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do not tell them you came here. Do not tell them the police have the brooch. If they ask, tell them you left it at the jeweler's for a cleaning or a clasp repair. You understand?" "Why?" Maria asked. "Because if there was malicious intent," Johnson said, his face grim, "and they find out, they might try something else. You need to be very careful. Avoid wearing anything else she gives you. Don't eat anything she prepares." The warning hit Maria like a physical blow. Don't eat anything she prepares. She thought about the Sunday dinners, the birthday cakes, the cups of tea Estella had poured for her over the years. Had she been dodging bullets this whole time without knowing it? "I understand," Maria whispered. Johnson handed her a card. "I'll call you as soon as the lab results come back. It shouldn't take more than 48 hours. He took the bag with the brooch and walked out of the shop. Maria watched him go, feeling a strange mix of fear and confusion. The brooch was gone, but the danger felt closer than ever. Henry came around the counter and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, Maria. George was looking out for you." Maria nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. She walked out of the shop and into the blinding Charleston sun. The world looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago. Tourists were walking by, cars were honking, but her world had completely changed. She sat in her car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. She thought about Estella's smile at the restaurant. She thought about the relief in Estella's eyes when she saw the brooch on Maria's chest. Could Estella really have done this? Could the mother of her grandchildren be a monster? And the darkest thought of all, the one she tried to push down, but couldn't, Nathaniel. He had dismissed her fears. He had called it superstition. He had forced the pin through the fabric of her blouse, right over her heart. Was he blind? Or was he involved? Maria started the engine. She had to go home. She had to pretend everything was normal. But as she pulled into traffic, she knew that normal was gone forever. She was driving back to a life where a gift could be a weapon and family could be the enemy. The realization that someone so close to her might want to harm her was too much to bear. She was alone, and for the first time in her life, she was terrified of her own son. Night had fallen over Charleston, but sleep was a stranger to Maria. She lay in the same bed where George had visited her just 24 hours ago, but the room felt different now. The safety of her home had evaporated. Every shadow in the corner looked like a threat. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. She stared at the ceiling fan, its blades cutting through the humid air, and her mind hit rewind. She played back the last 10 years of her life with Estella, searching for the cracks she had missed. How had she been so blind? Estella had always been polite. That was the word Maria settled on. Polite. Not warm, not affectionate, but polite. She sent thank you cards. She brought potato salad to the 4th of July barbecues. She smiled in family photos. But lying there in the dark, Maria realized the warmth had never reached Estella's eyes. Maria thought back to a Sunday dinner 2 months ago. She had offered to pick up the grandkids from school, so Estella could have a break. Instead of gratitude, Estella had stiffened. She had exchanged a quick, sharp look with Nathaniel, a look Maria hadn't understood at the time. "We have it handled, Maria," Estella had said, her voice tight. "You don't need to tire yourself out. You're getting older. You should rest." At the time, Maria thought Estella was being considerate. Now, the memory tasted bitter. You should rest. Was that concern? Or was Estella already counting down the days until Maria was gone? Then there were the financial conversations. Maria remembered a moment in the kitchen last Thanksgiving. Nathaniel had been talking about the rising cost of private schools for the boys. Estella had been washing dishes, her back to the room, but she had stopped scrubbing when Maria spoke up. "I've set aside money for their education, Nat," Maria had told him. "George and I planned for that." Estella had turned around then. She had wiped her hands on a towel, her eyes scanning Maria's face with a strange intensity. "That's very generous, Maria," she had said, "but you have your own expenses. You need to make sure your assets last, however long you have left." However long you have left. The phrase echoed in the silent bedroom. Maria shivered. She had brushed it off as a clumsy choice of words. Now, it sounded like a schedule. Maria sat up, unable to lie still any longer. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. Had Estella been planning this for months? The peace offering brooch wasn't an impulse buy. It was a calculated move. An antique. Something George would have loved. Something Maria would cherish. It was the perfect Trojan horse. The phone on her bedside table buzzed, startling her so badly. She nearly knocked over her lamp. It was a local number. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she picked it up. Mrs. Thomas? It was Detective Johnson. His voice was gravelly, tired. Yes, Detective, Maria said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Is everything okay? I wanted to update you personally, Johnson said. We ran a rush analysis on the powder found in the compartment. We have a preliminary match. Maria held her breath. What is it? It's a concentrated form of ricin, Mrs. Thomas, the detective said. The seriousness in his tone made the air in the room feel thin. It's a biotoxin, extremely potent. If that powder had been released into the air near your face, well, there is no antidote. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. Her hand went to her throat. Ricin. That wasn't something you bought at the grocery store. That was something you had to seek out. It was something you used when you wanted someone dead, and you didn't want them coming back. Are you sure? Maria whispered. The lab is 99% sure. Johnson confirmed. We're escalating this. I've already spoken to a judge. We're getting a warrant for Estella's search history and financial records. We believe this was a targeted attempt on your life. Maria closed her eyes. A tear leaked out and rolled down her cheek. It was true. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bad dream. Her daughter-in-law had tried to murder her with a birthday gift. Mrs. Thomas, the detective continued, his voice softer now. I need to ask you something difficult. Does your son know about your will? Yes, Maria said, her voice hollow. He's the sole beneficiary. Everything goes to him. And does his wife have access to his finances? I assume so, Maria said. We look at motive first, ma'am, Johnson said. And usually when it's family, it's about love or money. And in this case, it looks a lot like money. If you were to pass away, sudden heart failure or respiratory distress, no one would suspect a thing. The autopsy might have missed it. If we didn't know what to look for, your estate would pass to your son, and by extension, to her. The brutality of it left Maria breathless. She had spent her life building a safety net for her family. She had saved, invested, and lived frugally so that Nathaniel and his children would be taken care of. And that very generosity had painted a target on her back. What do I do? Maria asked. Stay inside, Johnson ordered. Lock your doors. Do not speak to them. If they call, let it go to voicemail. We are moving fast on this, but until we have her in custody, you are vulnerable. Do you understand? I understand, Maria said. She hung up the phone and stared at it for a long time. The device felt cold in her hand. The reality was sinking in, heavy and sharp. Estella didn't just dislike her. She didn't just find her annoying. Estella looked at Maria and saw a paycheck. She saw a pile of money standing between her and the lifestyle she wanted. And she was willing to kill the grandmother of her children to get it. Maria walked through her dark house, checking every lock. She slid the deadbolt home on the front door. She checked the back door. She checked the windows. As she stood in the living room, looking at a photo of Nathaniel and Estella on her mantel, a new, terrible thought took root. Did Nathaniel know? The detective had asked about the will. Nathaniel was the beneficiary. He was the one who had pinned the brooch on her. He was the one who had dismissed her fears. Maria grabbed the photo frame. Her hands were shaking. She looked at her son's face. He looked so happy, so innocent, but he was standing next to a woman who had packed poison into a piece of jewelry. Was he a victim of her manipulation, or was he a partner in her crime? Maria placed the photo face down on the mantel. She couldn't look at them. Not tonight. Tonight, she was a woman under siege in her own home, protected only by locked doors and the ghost of a husband who had loved her enough to break the rules of the afterlife. She went back to her bedroom and sat in the chair by the window, watching the street. She wouldn't sleep. Not until she knew the truth. And not until she knew if she had lost just a daughter-in-law, or if she had lost her son too. Maria stood in front of her bedroom mirror, her hands trembling as she fastened a pin to her blouse. It wasn't the silver wreath Estella had given her. That was sitting in an evidence bag at the police station, filled with a deadly toxin. Instead, Maria had chosen a simple gold cameo that George had bought for her on a trip to Italy 20 years ago. It was safe. It was made of love, not malice. She smoothed down her skirt, staring at her own reflection. She looked the same as she always did, a grandmother with neat silver hair and kind eyes, but she felt like a stranger. Inside, she was screaming. Today was the family dinner at Nathaniel's house. Detective Johnson had advised her to stay home, to lock her doors, but Maria couldn't do that. She needed to look them in the eye. She needed to know. If she stayed home, Estella might suspect that the plan had failed. She might run. Or worse, she might try something else while Maria was cowering behind a deadbolt. But there was a deeper, more painful reason Maria was putting on her shoes and grabbing her car keys. She needed to see Nathaniel. She needed to look at her son when the truth came out. She had to know if the boy she raised was capable of killing her, or if he was just a pawn in his wife's deadly game. The drive to Nathaniel's house felt like a funeral procession. The Sunday afternoon sun was bright, but the world felt gray and washed out. When she pulled into their driveway, her heart began to thump an erratic rhythm against her ribs. She saw Nathaniel's car. She saw the kids' bicycles on the lawn. It looked so normal. It was the perfect camouflage for a crime scene. Maria took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel one last time. You have to be strong, she told herself. For George. For yourself. She got out of the car and walked to the front door. Before she could even knock, Nathaniel pulled it open. He had an apron on and a spatula in his hand. Mom, you made it, he grinned, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Maria flinched. She couldn't help it. His touch, usually so comforting, now felt dangerous. Nathaniel pulled back, looking confused. You okay? He asked. Just a little headache, Maria lied, forcing a smile. She stepped inside. The house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, a smell that usually made her mouth water, but today made her stomach turn. Don't eat anything she prepares. The detective's warning rang in her ears like a siren. Estella was in the living room, pouring herself a glass of wine. It was a large glass, filled almost to the brim with dark red liquid. When she saw Maria, she froze. Her eyes dropped instantly to Maria's chest. The disappointment on Estella's face was naked and immediate. She didn't look happy to see her mother-in-law. She looked horrified that Maria was still standing. You didn't wear it, Estella said. Her voice wasn't sweet today. It was sharp, brittle. Maria touched the gold cameo on her lapel. No, she said calmly, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The clasp was faulty. I left it at the jeweler's to be repaired. Estella's face went pale. The wine glass in her hand wobbled, threatening to spill. The jeweler's, she repeated, her voice rising an octave. Which jeweler? Just a local shop, Maria said, walking past her to sit on the sofa. Why? Is it a problem? No, Estella stammered, taking a quick, large gulp of wine. No, of course not. I hope they don't damage it. It's very old. The evening dragged on in agonizing slow motion. Maria sat on the edge of the cushion, refusing the appetizers Estella offered. She claimed she had eaten a late lunch. She watched Nathaniel move between the kitchen and the living room, playing with the kids, laughing at the TV. He seemed so relaxed. If he knew his wife had tried to poison his mother with ricin, he was the greatest actor in the world. But Estella was unraveling. She paced the room. She refilled her wine glass 3 times in an hour. She kept glancing at Maria, then at the front door, as if she expected the jeweler or the police to burst in at any moment. The silence between the two women was thick with unsaid words. Maria could feel Estella's paranoia radiating off her like heat. Dinner was announced, but Maria sat at the table with an empty plate. She watched Estella eat, noticing how the younger woman's hands shook as she held her fork. Estella was terrified. She knew the faulty clasp story was a lie. She knew Maria knew. As the meal wound down, Nathaniel stood up. "I'm going to get the boys into the bath," he announced. "Estella, honey, do you want to start the coffee?" "I'll handle the coffee," Maria said quickly. She stood up. "Actually, Estella, why don't you stay here? I'd love to chat for a moment while Nat handles the kids." Nathaniel smiled, oblivious to the tension. "Great. Girl talk. I'll be upstairs." He left the room, whistling a tune. The sounds of his footsteps faded up the stairs, followed by the splash of bathwater running. The room went silent. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly. Estella stood by the sideboard, clutching her wine glass. She was tipsy now, her eyes glassy, her posture swaying slightly. She looked cornered. Maria walked slowly around the table. She didn't feel the fear anymore. The terror had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard sorrow. She looked at this woman she had welcomed into her family, the woman who slept next to her son, and she felt a strange sense of relief. The game was over. The pretense was done. They were alone. "Estella," Maria said softly. Estella jumped. She turned to face Maria, putting the wine glass down on the sideboard with a clatter. "What?" she snapped. "Why are you staring at me like that?" Maria stopped a few feet away. She didn't blink. She didn't shout. She just looked at her. "I need to talk to you about something," Maria said, trying to mask the tremor in her hands by clasping them behind her back. Estella let out a harsh, nervous laugh. "About what? The brooch? I told you, it's an heirloom. If you don't like it, just say so. You don't have to make up stories about the clasp." "It wasn't the clasp, Estella," Maria said. Estella's smile faltered. It was a fake, plastered-on thing that didn't reach her eyes. It looked like a mask that was slipping off. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The powder," Maria said. The word hung in the air between them. Estella stopped breathing. Her face, already pale, turned the color of ash. She took a step back, bumping into the sideboard. "Powder," Estella whispered. I don't." "The powder inside the brooch," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength. "The one hidden behind the pin. The one that releases when you try to take it off." Maria took a deep breath. The moment had come. There was no going back. She looked straight into her daughter-in-law's fearful, guilty eyes and asked the question that had been gnawing at her soul since she woke up from her dream. "Why did you give me that brooch?" The room was dead silent. Upstairs, a child laughed. Down here, the air was suffocating with the weight of the truth. Maria waited. She watched Estella's face crumble. She watched the defiance melt away, replaced by the raw, ugly panic of a woman who knows she has been caught. Estella opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at the door, then back at Maria. She looked like a trapped animal. "Why, Estella?" Maria pressed, her voice trembling with emotion. "I trusted you. Why did you want me dead?" Estella's face transformed instantly. The mask of the polite, slightly tipsy daughter-in-law evaporated, replaced by a flash of pure defensive anger. She took a step back, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, putting distance between herself and Maria's accusation. "That is ridiculous," Estella spat out, her voice rising. "You are out of your mind, Maria. Powder? Poison? You've been watching too many crime shows. I told you I bought that brooch at an estate sale. If there's something wrong with it, how was I supposed to know? She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, a physical barrier against the truth. Honestly, Nathaniel was right. You're getting paranoid in your old age. Maybe you're the one who needs help, not me, coming into my house, accusing me of... The police have it. Estella, Maria interrupted. Her voice was quiet, cutting through Estella's frantic shouting like a knife. Estella stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth hung open slightly. The color drained from her face so completely that her rouge stood out like bruises on her cheeks. What? Estella whispered. I didn't take it to be repaired, Maria said, standing her ground. She felt a strange calm wash over her, the kind of calm that comes when the worst has already happened. I took it to Henry on King Street. He found the mechanism. He found the pouch. And then he called Detective Johnson. Maria took a step forward, her eyes locked on Estella's. They tested the powder. Estella, it's ricin, a lethal dose. And right now, they are getting a warrant for your financial records and your internet search history. They know. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed in the background, a stark contrast to the life-or-death reality unfolding in the living room. Estella's defensive posture collapsed. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her hands began to tremble violently, the shaking spreading up her arms until her whole body seemed to vibrate with terror. She looked at the front door, then at the stairs where Nathaniel was still bathing the children. She looked trapped. Estella's voice cracked. She slumped onto the nearest armchair, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Maria felt a physical blow to her chest. There it was. The admission. Go this far. Maria repeated, her voice shaking. You tried to kill me. Estella, you put poison in a birthday gift. How far did you mean for it to go? Estella looked up. Her eyes were red and wet, but there was no sorrow in them, only a desperate, clawing panic. I just needed to know we were safe. Maria, you don't understand. You sit in that big house all alone, sitting on all that money George left, and you just watch us struggle. Struggle? Maria asked, baffled. Nathaniel has a good job. You have a beautiful home. I pay for the boys' vacations. I helped with the down payment on this house. It's not enough. Estella hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. Nathaniel made bad investments, okay? He doesn't tell you because he's ashamed. We are underwater, Maria. We are drowning in debt. And you mentioned changing your will. Maria froze. She remembered a passing comment she had made months ago about setting up a trust fund for the grandchildren, so they couldn't access the money until they were 25. I was protecting their future, Maria said softly. You were locking us out. Estella cried, tears streaming down her face now. If you put that money in a trust, we couldn't touch it. We would lose the house. We would lose everything. I couldn't let you change that will. I had to stop you before you signed the papers. Maria listened, her heart breaking into a million pieces. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a sudden snap. It was a calculation. Estella had looked at Maria's life and weighed it against a mortgage and credit card bills. She had decided that Maria's death was a fair price to pay for financial security. So you decided to murder me? Maria asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the betrayal. For money? You thought you could just kill me and take what George and I worked 40 years for. It wasn't just the money. Estella sobbed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. It was the control. You're always watching. You're always judging how I raise the kids, how I spend money. I was so tired of being afraid of you, Maria. I was tired of waiting for you to decide if we were worthy of your help. Maria looked at the woman sitting in the chair. She didn't see a monster. She saw a weak, terrified, greedy person who had let fear turn her into something unrecognizable. Estella had convinced herself she was the victim, that Maria was the oppressor holding the purse strings, justifying the unjustifiable. "I never judged you," Maria said, tears finally spilling over her own lashes. "I loved you. I thought of you as a daughter." "Well, you shouldn't have," Estella muttered bitterly. "I did what I had to do to protect my family." "Protect your family?" Maria shook her head slowly. "Estella, you destroyed it. Did you think about Nathaniel? Did you think about what this would do to him, finding his mother dead, and then spending the money she left him? Did you think he could live with that?" Estella went silent. She looked away, unable to meet Maria's gaze. Maria realized then that her instincts had been right all along. The cold feeling, the dream, the hesitation, it was all true. George hadn't just been warning her about a brooch. He was warning her about the rot at the center of her family. A profound sadness settled over Maria. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. She looked at the photos on the mantelpiece, pictures of happier times that were now tainted forever. "Does Nathaniel know?" Maria asked. It was the last question she needed to ask, the most important one. Estella shook her head vigorously. "No, he would never. He loves you. He's too soft. He thinks I bought it at an antique shop. He has no idea." Maria let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her son was innocent, foolish perhaps, blind to his wife's true nature, but he wasn't a killer. That small mercy was the only thing keeping Maria standing. She looked at Estella with deep pity. "You think you did this for him," Maria said softly, "but you've lost him forever." Estella looked up, panic flaring again. "You're not going to tell him, are you?" "Maria, please. We can fix this. I'll leave. I'll go away. Don't tell him. Don't let the police take me in front of the boys." Maria straightened her back. She touched the gold cameo on her chest, the safe, loving gift from her husband. She thought about the poison in the evidence bag. She thought about the funeral Estella had been planning for her. "I trusted you," Maria said, her voice trembling but firm. "I welcomed you. I cooked for you. I loved your children, but you tried to erase me." She turned toward the hallway, hearing the water drain from the bathtub upstairs. Heavy footsteps began to thump down the stairs. Nathaniel was coming back. "I will not be part of this lie anymore," Maria said, looking down at Estella. "I am not the one who destroyed this family. Estella, you are." The front door chimes rang. Blue lights flashed through the living room curtains, illuminating Estella's terrified face in a harsh, strobing rhythm. "And I think," Maria whispered, "that's Detective Johnson." The flashing blue lights danced across the living room walls, painting the family photos in frantic, strobing colors. Detective Johnson stepped through the front door, followed by two uniformed officers. The sounds of the evening, the crickets, the distant traffic, were drowned out by the crackle of police radios. Nathaniel appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his hair wet, a confused smile frozen on his face. He looked from the police to his wife, then to his mother. "Mom," he asked, his voice small. "Estella, what's going on? Is someone hurt?" Estella didn't answer. She stood up slowly, holding her wrists out as if she had rehearsed this moment in her nightmares. When the officer clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists, the metallic sound echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. "Nathaniel," Maria said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. "She tried to hurt me, son. The police have the proof." Nathaniel looked at Estella, waiting for her to scream, to deny it, to fight back. But Estella just looked at the floor, defeated. Her silence was the loudest thing in the room. It was a confession that shattered Nathaniel's world in an instant. He slumped against the banister, sliding down until he was sitting on the bottom step, his head in his hands. Maria wanted to run to him. She wanted to hold him, like she did when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. But she couldn't. The distance between them now was too great, filled with lies and poison and years of blindness. As the police led Estella out to the waiting cruiser, Maria realized that she had saved her own life, but she had lost the version of her family she had tried so hard to protect. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal terms and hushed whispers. Attempted poisoning. Premeditated. Financial motive. The words appeared in the local papers. Maria Thomas, the respected widow in the quiet Charleston suburb, was suddenly the center of a scandal. But Maria didn't hide. She went to the grocery store. She tended her garden. She walked with her head held high. The shame wasn't hers to carry. She had survived a betrayal that would have broken a weaker woman, and she refused to let it define her final years. The hardest part wasn't the police interviews or the stares from the neighbors. It was Nathaniel. He came by the house only once, a week after the arrest. He looked 10 years older. The spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, gray exhaustion. He stood in her foyer, refusing to take off his coat, refusing the tea she offered. "I didn't know, Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "You have to believe me." "I know you didn't," Maria said gently. "I know my son, but—" He struggled with the words. "Did you have to call the police? Couldn't we have gotten her help? She's the mother of my boys, Mom. Now, they have to visit her through glass." The accusation hung in the air, unfair and sharp. He was grieving, and in his grief, he needed someone to blame. It was easier to blame his mother for ruining the family than to accept that his wife was a monster. "She tried to kill me, Nathaniel," Maria said firmly. She didn't raise her voice, but the steel in her tone made him look up. "She packed a deadly toxin into a birthday gift and waited for me to die. I didn't send her to prison. Her actions did. I chose to live." Nathaniel didn't argue. He just nodded, turned around, and walked out the door. He didn't slam it. He just closed it softly. That was the beginning of the silence. The estrangement wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches. It was just a slow drift. Nathaniel moved to a smaller apartment across town with the boys. He stopped calling on Sundays. The holidays came and went with only a brief, polite text message. It hurt. God, it hurt. Maria spent many nights crying into her pillow, missing the grandchildren she adored, missing the son she had raised. But as the months turned into a year, the sharp pain dulled into a quiet ache, a scar that was part of her landscape now. Maria began to rebuild. She realized that for years she had been making herself small to fit into Estella's world. She had been walking on eggshells, trying to buy love with tuition payments and silence. Now she was free. She hired a lawyer and updated her will, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. She set up untouchable trust funds for the boys' education, ensuring their future was secure regardless of their parents' mistakes. She donated a portion of her savings to a shelter for women starting over. She started spending more time with Mary next door. They drank iced tea on the porch and talked about everything and nothing. She joined a book club at the library. She took a painting class she had always been too busy for. One evening, just before her 69th birthday, Maria sat on her front porch in a wicker rocking chair. The Charleston sunset was painting the sky in strokes of fire orange and bruised purple. The air was cooling down, carrying the scent of jasmine and salt water. She wore a simple cotton dress. On her lapel, she wore no jewelry. She didn't need it. She thought about the dream. She thought about George standing at the foot of her bed, his face full of worry. He had reached across the veil to save her. He had given her the gift of intuition, the courage to question, and the strength to act. She wasn't just a survivor of a crime. She was a woman who had learned to trust herself again. She had learned that blood isn't always thicker than water, and that peace is worth more than the appearance of a happy family. She took a sip of her lemonade and looked at the empty chair beside her. She could almost feel George sitting there, his hand resting on hers. "I'm okay, George," she whispered to the twilight. "It's quiet now, but I'm okay." She wasn't lonely. She was solitary. There was a difference. She had her life, her dignity, and her truth. The betrayal had burned down the forest of her old life, but in the clearing that remained, new things were beginning to grow. She watched the sun dip below the horizon, closing the chapter on the darkest year of her life, and smiled. She was ready for tomorrow. What would you have done if you were Maria? Would you have trusted your instincts, or would you have dismissed it as just a dream? Do you believe your family would ever betray you like this? How would you confront them? Have you ever had a moment where your intuition saved you from something dangerous? Share your experiences below. What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments. And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, even a small donation makes a big difference. It truly helps keep the channel alive. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away. With love,